and welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. So we'll dig into some of the positions. We're going to look at a number of positions this week like we did last week in terms of potential candidates. Now, I know Cody's picked before he tells me this, but I'm a proponent of not picking up a veteran running back because, you know, if you look at the age and you look at the mileage and you look at the history of deals for mid-tier money is potential. But actually, when I looked at the contract details and actually, remembered the injury history of Marlon Mack, there's a potential there to pick. He took a 1 year, $2 million deal last year to stay. Obviously injured the year prior. So that's 2 years kind of lost game tape. In 2019 he had the 1,000-yard season. 2018 he had about 900 yards. 8 or 9 touchdowns, another one through the air. So there is a history of production there, but every year a running back is removed from that production. That's probably what starts to concern you, and there's a tendency to think, go with young blood. They've got 3 or 4 years to get the tread in the tires, then you move on to the next one. But you think Marlon Mack's a fit, Cody, for this one?
Look, this is a guy that prior to the injury rushed for basically 2,000 yards over 2 seasons, and he has dynamic ability. He was really good prior to the injury. And you see when guys get further, Cooper Kupp is one of the best examples of how much better a guy can be when he gets a year away from that injury. That was supposed to be Marlon Mack really this year. He's supposed to be a little bit further away from the injury. That was supposed to be this past season. But Jonathan Taylor's on the team. And it's like, how could you even think about giving Marlon Mack a carry instead of Jonathan Taylor? So he just falls down the depth chart. It's not like he was unhealthy this year. He just didn't get the reps because the guys in front of him were better. Look, if the running back room is a day 2 pick, Rex Burkhead, Marlon Mack, and an undrafted free agent, that's a really good running back room. You can have success with that running back room. You can have a very good training camp and preseason and ultimately pick 3 guys to be on the roster with that running back room. Marlon Mack feels like a very low risk, high reward guy, because if he comes in and shows you any semblance of those 2 seasons where he's really successful with the Colts, any semblance, he's a worthwhile guy to have on the roster. And best of all, I know he goes north and south. Philip Lindsay went east and west. I know Marlon Mack goes north and south. Yeah.
Well, Philip Lindsay didn't even fucking make it to the line of scrimmage half the time, so far less anything else. And again, I suppose Philip Lindsay's one that shows you that a couple of years out of his peak, and then just the juice just goes, and it's a quick, and a quick position that can do that. And I think another year-to-year position. Sorry, here you go.
Well, I think the biggest thing, and I said this on the radio show last week, and to me, it's one of the biggest roster composition moments for the Texans. Rex Burkhead had an amazing game against the Chargers. Okay. He had a phenomenal game, one of the best games of his career. When a guy like Rex Burkhead has that game, you think, is that the last time he ever has that in him? When a young guy has a game like Rex Burkhead, you think to yourself, damn, when is he going to have that game again? I think that's the biggest difference between when the old guy succeeds and when a young guy succeeds. Yeah. When an old guy succeeds, you wonder if that's the last time he can do that. When a young guy succeeds, you're expecting and hoping that the next time he does that is the next time he steps on the field. That's the biggest difference, and that's why I want to see more young guys than old guys, because most of the time, like Rex Burkhead's never having a Chargers game ever again. I'm confident in saying that. And I'll be happy to say I'm wrong if it happens. But old guys, you wonder if that's the last time they have that. Young guys, you wonder when the next time. And that's part of the hope that young guys bring you on a roster.
Yeah, and I think the hesitance for me to sign anybody, a veteran, that position is in theory the easiest position to fill on your roster. You can get undrafted guys. You see it every year. You can get late round picks. Like Ramondre Stevenson at the we saw. Run it downhill at us in week 4 or 5 in NRG. And you can get guys late every year because there's just so many. When you look at the wide receiver list and you look at the watching the combine over the weekend, there's just so many good quality guys with production at different levels, because ultimately if somebody's got the vision to see a hole, that's the same at any level ultimately. And I think that's what's kind of frustrated many of us for a long time. We've not seen running backs with juice Apart from the chronic misuse of Lamar Miller, I think it's the closest we've got since Arian Foster has been injured. So I think there's a huge part of kind of turning the page, and hopefully this offense will turn the page. If we're going to get a power run scheme, then so be it. In terms, just staying on that side of the ball, wide receiver. A couple of names I had, Cody, was a couple of guys that Caserio had worked out in his time in New England in the 2018 draft, both up for now. Braxton Berrios was my first one that I thought of, but actually looking at some of Joe Douglas's comments in terms of at the combine, they look pretty set to keep him, providing they get an agreement. But a guy who, albeit asked for a trade last year in Pittsburgh, but James Washington, he was 60th overall from Oklahoma when he came out. And he's a guy that obviously saw his role diminish, but I think you're talking about if there's any franchise synonymous with drafting a position well, it's Pittsburgh wide receivers. So kind of falling down the depth chart, and there, that's probably just because they keep stacking talent in that position. It's easy to replace. Don't think you'll have huge market. It's interesting because you've got guys like Allen Robinson at the top. You've got Mike Williams that are all going to get paid. So these guys are going to get these hugely inflated contracts. Devontae Adams, Godwin, the Bucks, etc. They're going to kind of really fill up that top end. And I think there's going to be a quick fall down to the next couple of levels. But James Washington was a guy that I thought. But last year his role was diminished. But what do you think about kind of fortifying the roster a bit with some vets at that spot?
Yeah, again, I definitely feel like they prefer a veteran at the slot receiver position. And they were confident in, Chris Conley being that backup outside guy. That's a veteran that had been around a little bit. The familiarity with David Culley was something that I think probably helped Conley in his roster spot. Moore is still, he was fine a couple of different times. Look, bring in a bunch of guys. Not the Dante Moncrief, when he was here for 2 weeks in training camp and like that, there's nothing left to Dante Moncrief. Like there's got to be a little bit left to the guys. And here's the thing that I'm worried about with Nick Caserio is if he's been a part of the drafts in New England, they have not been able to nail it at wide receiver. Yeah. They have missed that position. And look, you can put it off on Belichick if you want, but Nick Caserio, I have to imagine, had a heavy say in the wide receiver position because the guy used to be the damn wide receivers coach for that team. So you think about last year when who he decided to keep on the roster. Well, he kept the return man who ended up in LA with the Chargers.
Yeah, Andre Roberts.
Andre Roberts. Yeah, he kept Andre Roberts. Alex Erickson played better than him in training camp. I was there almost every day. Alex Erickson was better at returns than Andre Roberts, and Andre Roberts was barely on the field in training camp. Desmond King was better at returns than Andre Roberts. Like, he misdiagnosed a couple of things with the wide receiver spot. I don't know that there was a guy that he totally missed on in training camp last year. Like, the guys were the guys. Like, you knew Nico was going to be on the team. You knew Cooks was going to be on the team. Conley, being a veteran familiar with Culley, you knew he was going to be on the team. I'd love to see a veteran on the outside, a veteran at the slot, and I'd love to see a draft pick there as well. I'm not keen on spending a ton of money. I'm not really in love with the idea of trading for somebody off of somebody's roster. But if he could identify someone, the tough part is, where are the reps? Because if Cook stays healthy, he's one outside rep. He's one outside wide receiver spot. If Nico stays healthy, he's the other outside starter. So where are the reps? There's reps at the slot. There's reps for backup when Cooks or Nico's not in. So you want to invest appropriately, but you also want to have some upside to that position too. I think you look for some familiarity maybe with either Pep Hamilton or Nick Caserio from a free agency standpoint, and then try to put some young guys and sprinkle them in on the roster as well.
Just on that theme of training camp and wide receiver, how much do you think the early injury took out Nico? Because the reports were from training camp, and I wasn't there myself, were that a guy who just looks different, looks a cut above the rest. Now, my instant cynical sort of thought is that because he's playing against guys like Terrence Mitchell, but what he saw on tape, when you go back and watch the tape, is a guy who can't get open in man coverage. And he's a big body guy who's meant to be a possession receiver at times, struggled with that when people were jamming him up at the line. Now, obviously, there's a lot of learning about hand fighting and placement and first step off the line of scrimmage, when the ball's snapped for a receiver. But it felt like his camp reports didn't match up. So I'm not saying it's a Lestar gene, but it might be somewhere in between there.
Whoa, we're putting Lester Gene on this guy.
I'm saying it's not saying that.
Oh, man. So Nico impressed me. Nico impressed me. You got to think about the fact that he had some, hiccups there in training camp. He had some hiccups in the season when he hurt his shoulder. We don't know exactly how healthy he was throughout the course of the year. He spent a good portion of the season with bad Davis Mills or Tyrod Taylor as the quarterback throwing him the football. I'm excited for what Nico brings to the table. Do I think he's going to be like some amazing wide receiver? No. We've seen guys come in year one, year two, in the third round or the second round come in and immediately be contributors. I don't know that Nico's that guy, but if he's growing into a regular contributor spot, again, I think you got to kind of match up the timelines with these wide receivers. Cooks is the number one, Nico's the number two. And there may be a moment where Nico's the one and whoever replaces Cooks is the two, but then you hope that ultimately the guy that replaces Cooks is the guy that can surpass Nico, or Nico gets so good that he cements himself as the number one. I think that's my big thing is like, can he grow into the hope that we have for him, which is regular wide receiver contributor. Again, I look at it similar to the Cincinnati situation. They had T. Higgins the year before they got Jamar Chase. Like T. Higgins was not supposed to be the number one wide receiver on that team. He played pretty well as a rookie. He played fantastic in his second year. It just so happened they had a guy on the roster that was way better than T. Higgins his second year in the league. That's fine. They're thrilled to have both those guys. I think Nico is kind of the T. Higgins. He's maybe the best guy until you get somebody that's way better.
You want to get to a position whereby Nico can be the guy who can consistently develop and beat their number two, number three corner, and that's probably the kind of role, and that's probably aligned with these draft slate. I think in terms of where he's been picked, and I think that's for sure. And in terms of bring guys like Chris Conley back, I think to fill out the roster, I think you do that. I think they showed enough last year that they were okay in their camp bodies, low guarantees, and hopefully they're beaten out by young guys that you can pick up as undrafted or where have you. Flipping on to the other side of the ball, I think cornerback's the perennial spot. You got to hope that one falls to you in the second round, because I just don't see. I think if you polled all top 10 GMs in the draft this year, I think every single one of them would tell you ideally they would trade back, and but I just don't think that the quality at the top end or the quarterback or the overvalued position is going to allow that. So I think it's going to be go back to the well, hopefully, to certainly get some depth. The name I had, again looking back at Caserio's workouts in 2018 draft, was Isaiah Oliver. Now he's not quite lived up to his draft slate. I think he was just at the top of the second round coming out of Colorado State. He converted inside to a slot receiver, slot corner last year at the nickel, and did a lot of good things on some tape. But then he got injured after a couple of weeks, so he missed all the last season, or after 4 weeks of the season last year. He's a guy that has potentially got some inside kind of versatility that can if you're depending on what they do with King, I think that's up in the air. After all his walk-through misses and what have you, I don't know how much he wants to be here or not. But yeah, I think Isaiah Oliver a name for me. Any guys out there you think, Cody, that they could potentially look at corner to try and blend at this? I know Mitchell's on a 2-year deal, which you kind of hopefully want to get someone. If this team's generally progressed, I think Stephen Mitchell's a good example of you get out of that contract in year 2 because he's beaten out by younger but hopefully incrementally better players at that spot.
Yeah, see, it's tough for me to figure out exactly what they're going to do at corner without knowing Desmond King's status. I'd be fine with Desmond King coming back. I don't know if that was a David Culley issue or a Lovie Smith issue. If it was a Lovie Smith issue, King and Lovie didn't get along, then I don't see how he comes back. Yeah. But if they could put it past each other, they could put it behind. Desmond King played some really good football for this team. Played inside and outside, so the versatility there is important. Look, I think that cornerback to me is the absolute just guys get overpaid like silly money. I don't really anticipate them taking a big swing. I could see them maybe taking a risk on some guys that have been injured or guys that maybe have, sort of like what you put together, underperformed, but I don't see any sort of big investment here. I would think that they might spend a little bit more at the safety spot and then just kind of try to figure things out from a corner standpoint. Maybe it's King, hopefully a rookie. Like the perfect spot is probably if you have an additional first round pick from Deshaun Watson trade, that's probably going to find yourself in the corner market. Or I don't know that there's a player that's going to necessitate this, but if Denver or Washington or Carolina jumped up to 3 and then a corner was sitting there when you had their first round pick, Sauce Gardner is the guy that Derek Stingley, both of those guys, Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, Derek Stingley from LSU. Like you can't take those guys at 3, but at 6, at 8, at 7, at 11, great selection.
Yeah.
Well, and then fill it out with it's a very, very deep defensive line draft from all the draft experts. So if you pass on the pass rusher early for corner, you can go pass rusher later.
Yeah. We'll come back to that third spot. I think definitely just to round us off before we get out of here. But yeah, I think guys like, maybe like an Artie Burns or something like that, who's, was taken in the first round, not lived up to it in Pittsburgh. Shandon Sullivan, who kind of took on a big role when Jair Alexander got injured in Green Bay. So, guys like that are, maybe ascending, haven't been paid yet, going to prove themselves and want to take on an extra deal. But I think Sullivan probably going to get some decent money out there. But yeah, but it's funny when you say the corner market. If you look at all the guys that got paid, with James Bradbury in New York, if you look at Xavier Howard in Miami, they're all in the trade block because those big deals, once you get past the guarantees and that APY starts ballooning at the back end of the 4 to 5 year deal, then teams start to get a bit uncomfortable with it because ultimately people hit the market, partly because their own team isn't paying them, and I think that's the pitfalls of free agency.
Do we want to go down a familiarity road? Do we want to bring back Vernon Hargreaves? He's got playoff experience on the bench. Maybe we want to talk about Vernon Hargreaves again. No, I'm kidding.
Yes, well, but I think though that kind of model of guys with elite traits that were taken high haven't quite worked out is a good thing that you've seen, or consistently go to the well, and I hate to keep talking about New England, but ultimately it's a blueprint that we've got to lean on. So, there's that point there, and for that. So obviously just while we're talking about the secondary there, it kind of feels like Justin Reed's position might have changed. I thought he was gone and Good is gone, but then I know they kind of Lovey. I think Lovey's maybe made a pitch for him to stay. I don't think they'll give him the money. I noticed he put on his Instagram, I've decided to sign with or whatever yesterday. And people would say, well, it would be legal tampering, but all these deals have been done this week, haven't they, pretty much, or they've been sounded out till, I think, I always see that the free agency process, Cody, is that basically the agents and the GMs are all in one place in Indianapolis for the final time this year, sadly, and then the parameters of the deals get done, and basically it's just a bidding war to outbid people last minute and legal tampering. But I think he's gone. But it kind of felt like, anyway, there was definitely an attempt by both sides maybe to make a move with the soundings via the media.
I like Justin Reed. I think he's a nice player. It's not the end of the world if Justin Reed's not on this team.
Yeah. Now, what'd you pay him? Yeah, that's, I think, where does his number? Because it's never been there for a full year, apart from as the third safety in his rookie year.
It's interesting because Texans fans and people who've watched Justin Reed probably look at him one way. And the way we talk about cornerbacks, the way we talk about like, hey, let's go find a guy that's maybe underperformed and maybe is a little undervalued, is probably how other teams view Justin Reed. Like they probably think that like, hey, let's go get this guy. Let's go get a deal. He's played a lot of football, but he's been hurt a little bit. The team's bad. Safety's tough when the team is bad. So like some team probably views him as like a risk taker guy. Like he's not a sure thing to be a regularly good NFL player. Like there's like, look, a couple of years ago, he was the second best safety on the team. Kareem Jackson was the best. He was the second. And then Tyrann Mathieu was the third best safety on the team. Like he had a good season that year. He's had really good football. Can you replace that with someone else at a lesser amount than what he may be looking for? Yeah. I think that's certainly a possibility.
And staying on that theme, I think I would be hesitant to pay Malik Collins. I know the edge rushers, or interior rushers rather, are at a premium, but I think the money he'll want at this stage of his career. Now, teams may be put off by the fact that it didn't work out with the Raiders, but after his rookie deal, he played some of his best ball on the rookie deal, not on that deal with the Raiders. But I think when you look at the list, when you look at that position, when you look at the curve the team are on right now in terms of development, I'm struggling to see paying an interior guy that sort of money.
I really get weary when a guy plays his best football this late in his career and it was on a 1-year deal. Like I have a hard time thinking he's going to be able to replicate that. Also, the personal foul penalties stick out in my mind for some reason. Maybe it's a little unfair, but the guy basically handed a team a game at one point this year from personal foul penalty. I get that the referees are a little iffy with some of this stuff. I understand that, but look, can you find the next Malik Collins? Also, too, I'm interested to see how much of that was Bobby King. Bobby King was probably the best position coach on this team last year. When you think about what the defensive line did and who the defensive line was, and for the fact that Bobby King's not even a defensive line coach, he was a linebackers coach that they moved down to defensive line, and he was the best position coach on this team. Now he's in Tennessee. So what does the new defensive line coach look for? Do you believe that he can take guys to the next level? Because if you believe in him and you believe that that guy can get a lot out of someone who's underperformed previously, just find the next Malik Collins. Malik Collins is not an extremely unique player to the National Football League. There's a lot of those guys. And plus, I would think that, again, additional draft picks, the emergence of Roy Lopez last year, it doesn't make Malik Collins a must bring back. If the price range is right, yeah, I'd be happy to see him back. But the moment you get uncomfortable with the amount of price range, or the moment you get uncomfortable with the conversation about him coming back, buy Malik, have fun somewhere else.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at a guy like Bilal Nichols from Chicago, again, on the 2018 workout list for Caserio, but, you know, he played 64% of the snaps last year, racked up a number of sacks, 50-odd tackles. You know, he's not going to necessarily command, you know, the 5+ that, you know, that Malik came on. If he was on a 1-year 5, he's going to be looking for, you know, a 2 or 3 year at 6 or 7 at a minimum. So, you know, you think when we're trying to find value to fill out spots and see what they've got, he's a younger guy. When he came out of Delaware, he came out as an underclassman, so still, you know, below 25. So these are the kind of guys you want to go after. Or if it's the kind of bust route, you know, you got Taven Bryant there, who never lived up to his billing in Jacksonville. Not been great, but you never know. You get him under Jacques César, could he turn him into a player potentially? You know, Malik McDowell, or even, and I know he was hurt last year and he had the kind of heart stuff. But Maurice Hurst, when he came out of Michigan, was a guy that kind of dropped unfairly. Went to San Francisco last year, only played 2 games, got injured. But, you know, these kind of bust types, can we develop them and find, you know, found money in guys that have underperformed elsewhere? Now, we've not had the coaching staff to do that in previous years, but listen to Jacques César talk, kind of gave me a bit, you know, and it's easy, you know, words easy, you can sound good in an interview, but ultimately he's there to motivate guys and to teach them technique, and I was motivated listening to him, so I'm hoping, you know, he can take over from Bobby King, because I think he was an underrated loss. Yeah, I do agree with that.
I'm so glad you brought up Taven Bryan. I have crushed Jacksonville for years for taking Taven Bryan. That should have been Lamar Jackson. The Jaguars should have taken Lamar
Jackson. He
wasn't
a first round pick,
yeah. The Jaguars should have taken Lamar Jackson. I have crushed them for taking Taven Bryan, and I have hammered my buddies who are Jacksonville fans for them drafting that guy, because at the time I remember it being like a sort of an overdraft in some, you know, draft experts' eyes. Ultimately, I think he had like a kind of a nice year for the Jaguars this year. But yeah, I'd be fine with a guy like that, and I'd probably have to go. Maybe I'd have to go delete some tweets if he ends up on the Texans. I'm kidding. I don't do that. I mean, I kind of do, but, you know, yeah, that's fine. A reclamation project. Again, the next Malik Collins, once the moment Malik Collins prices himself out of coming back, find the next Malik Collins.
Yeah. And I think it looks like Jacob Martin's on his way out. I think his, you know, as a situational edge rusher values his skill set more. But, you know, I've said that a number of times. He'll never get sacks early in games because he catches tackles off on their heels early and then very rarely contributes late on. You know, never really quite developed his game against the run. So I think there's an opportunity to get there. A couple of names I looked at. Dorrance Armstrong, again, was linked with New England, a workout top 30 visit in Foxborough in 2018. I know he's not really lived up to much with the Cowboys, but certainly he's one there when he came out of Kansas in the 4th round. But had a decent season last year, 37 tackles, 12 QB hits as well. Just a good free agency.